The submarine lay silent beneath the North Atlantic waves, a shadow of metal moving through a world defined by darkness and pressure.
Here you go, Johnson.
In those
Careful, it's
confined
hot.
corridors, where the hum of
Smells great,
engines
Cookie.
and
Much
the occasional
obliged.
creak of hull plates punctuated the hours, life followed a rhythm dictated by necessity. Among the crew, the submarine cook held a peculiar position, tasked with the preparation of food under conditions few could imagine, yet inadvertently becoming an observer, a chronicler, and in some ways, an agent of survival and disruption. It was here, beneath the surface, that an unusual strategy took root: the deliberate disposal of food scraps overboard. Simple, almost mundane in appearance, these actions were embedded in a broader context of anti-submarine warfare, where human ingenuity often compensated for the limits of technology. The Atlantic was unforgiving, and each patrol carried the weight of risk. The cook, known among the crew as Fisher, moved with measured precision through narrow passageways, preparing meals that offered comfort and sustenance in a realm otherwise defined by tension and monotony. In letters later recovered, he described the care with which ingredients were rationed, the timing of meals to coincide with shifts in operations, and the subtle observations made while performing routine tasks. Every motion, from chopping vegetables to stoking the small galley stove, was accompanied by awareness of sonar pings, the vibration of distant engines, and the faint but persistent knowledge that Allied destroyers prowled the waters above. Fisher's method of disposing scraps was at first a practical necessity. Waste needed to be managed in a vessel where every cubic foot was precious. But over time, observation revealed an unintended effect. Small pieces of food drifting in the current attracted the attention of birds and sea creatures, creating disturbances detectable by sonar equipment or noted by enemy lookouts during reconnaissance. Fisher, ever meticulous, began to recognize patterns: how currents carried the scraps, which angles produced the greatest surface disruption, and when to release them for maximum impact. In effect, he had discovered a subtle tool of misdirection, one that leveraged the natural environment in service of tactical advantage. The practice remained modest in scale, yet significant in principle. Other crew members, initially skeptical, began to observe changes in the detection patterns and movements of enemy forces during patrols. Subtle shifts, delayed depth charge drops, slightly altered pursuit patterns, or the temporary distraction of surface vessels illustrated the potential influence of human ingenuity, even in acts that appeared trivial. Each disposal was timed with precision, reflecting not only a knowledge of physics and oceanography, but an understanding of human and mechanical behavior. The simple act of throwing scraps became a conduit for strategic observation and minor, cumulative disruption. Beneath the surface, the crew's routines provided structure and continuity. Watches rotated with exacting regularity. Sonar operators monitored the depths with unwavering attention, and officers interpreted data with measured judgment. Fisher's contributions, while unconventional, were integrated into this disciplined system. Observations made during his daily tasks were communicated quietly to officers, influencing adjustments in speed, depth, or course. The interplay between mundane duties and operational insight illustrates the human-centered nature of submarine warfare. Innovation often emerged from the smallest gestures, informed by awareness and reflection. In addition to strategic implications, these actions had a psychological dimension. Crew members, confined within the submarine's steel walls for weeks at a time, relied on routines and small rituals to maintain morale. Fisher's attention to meals, to the methodical disposal of scraps, and to the cleanliness of the galley provided a stabilizing rhythm. It was a reminder that even in a vessel designed for stealth, precision, and survival, human effort and care retained significance. The convergence of practical necessity, tactical effect, and personal discipline exemplifies the broader principle that war is as much a human endeavor as it is a technological one. Throughout patrols, the interaction between human action and environmental forces became increasingly apparent. Currents, tides, and the behavior of wildlife interacted with the vessel's movements and the disposal of waste to produce subtle signals in the water column. Enemy forces, relying on detection methods both visual and sonar-based, responded to these signals in ways that could be anticipated and, at times, exploited. Fisher's observations were methodical, noting the drift of debris, the timing of tidal surges, and the reactions of surface vessels to minor disturbances. This iterative observation, combined with disciplined execution, illustrates the cumulative effect of human intelligence in operational contexts often dominated by machines and weaponry. Over the weeks, patterns emerged that reinforced the significance of seemingly small actions. Patrol logs indicated minor anomalies in enemy tracking, moments when pursuit forces hesitated, or slight deviations in depth charge deployment. These occurrences were modest, and no single action guaranteed safety or success. Yet, cumulatively, they reflected a growing understanding that human observation, methodical experimentation, and careful execution could produce meaningful impact. Fisher's role, though centered on sustenance, became an unintentional but effective component of tactical strategy. The narrative of these patrols is also a story of continuity and inevitability. Each day followed from the last, each action informed by accumulated knowledge, and each decision weighed in the context of prior experience. There were no sudden reversals, no artificial dramatic spikes, and no episodic resets. The story of Fisher and the disposal of scraps exemplifies the slow, reflective progression of insight in war. The unassuming act of a single crew member contributed to cumulative strategic understanding and, indirectly, to the disruption of enemy operations. The human element remained central. Careful observation, disciplined action, and sustained attention produced outcomes that technology alone could not achieve. By the end of this initial patrol phase, the crew had internalized the rhythm of life beneath the waves. Routine, observation, and small innovations formed a coherent system of adaptation and subtle influence. Fisher's practice, at once mundane and strategically informative, illustrated the broader principle that operational effectiveness is grounded in the integration of human effort with environmental and technological systems. In this context, the Atlantic became both a theater of war and a laboratory for continuous learning. Chapter 1 closes on the understanding that warfare beneath the waves is shaped not only by weapons and sonar, but by disciplined human ingenuity. The story of a submarine cook throwing scraps, observed and refined over successive patrols, offers a lens into the interplay of routine, observation, and tactical insight. It is a reminder that even in confined, pressured, and dangerous conditions, small, deliberate actions can ripple outward, influencing outcomes in ways that are quiet, cumulative, and inevitable. The stage is set for the subsequent phases of escalation, tactical refinement, and operational impact, a progression grounded in human effort. Perfect, Mohammed. I'll begin Chapter 2, Escalation of Submarine Tactics and Allied Detection, 1,000 words. Continuing in the WW2 documentary style, calm, immersive, TDS-ready, and following your narrative rules. Chapter 2, Escalation of Submarine Tactics and Allied Detection. In the months following the initial patrols, the strategic environment beneath the Atlantic waves began to shift. The simple observations and minor interventions pioneered by Fisher, the submarine cook, had revealed broader patterns that commanders and crews could leverage. Submarine operations, once primarily focused on navigation, evasion, and attack, evolved to integrate the cumulative lessons derived from seemingly trivial actions. Scraps disposed, currents observed, and patterns of enemy response noted. The early recognition of subtle environmental cues became a cornerstone of tactical evolution, demonstrating that even the smallest details could have disproportionate operational significance. Allied detection capabilities, long dependent on a combination of sonar, radio intelligence, and aerial reconnaissance, were simultaneously adapting to the changing threat. Patrol vessels and destroyers began to refine their search techniques, responding not only to overt submarine activity, but also to nuanced disturbances in the water column. Small debris, Foam trails and minor surface anomalies, once dismissed as inconsequential, were now scrutinized. Fisher and other crew members became aware that every decision, no matter how routine, contributed to a broader ecosystem of observation and counter-observation. Their understanding of currents, timing, and the interplay of light and shadow informed navigation and operational planning, effectively blurring the line between sustenance duty and tactical intelligence. The escalation of tactics was gradual yet deliberate. Submarines began to experiment with alternate routes, leveraging undercurrents and deep water channels to minimize detection probability. Diversions, time maneuvers, and calculated noise management complemented the simple act of disposing scraps, creating layered patterns of movement designed to confound Allied trackers. Each patrol became a laboratory for iterative experimentation, adjusting depth, speed, and timing based on previous encounters and observations. The underlying principle was clear. The environment itself could be a tool, and disciplined human attention could transform routine actions into tactical advantage. As operations intensified, the crew's understanding of human behavior, both among themselves and within enemy ranks, became increasingly vital. Allied crews were trained to interpret anomalies, unexpected surface activity, deviations in sonar readings, or irregular vessel patterns, as signals requiring response. By observing these reactions over successive missions, Fisher and the commanding officers could anticipate typical countermeasures. Minor, deliberate deviations in routine, adjusting meal schedules, altering timing of surface activity, or varying the disposal of scraps, produced subtle but measurable effects on enemy response patterns. The emphasis was not on dramatic confrontation, but on continuous, incremental influence, a quiet escalation grounded in disciplined observation. This phase also highlighted the importance of cumulative intelligence. Logs from previous patrols were reviewed meticulously, with every detail cross-referenced against observed enemy reactions. Patterns emerged, specific shipping lanes, zones of high detection probability, and the timing of Allied patrol rotations. Fisher's contributions, though unconventional, were integrated into this analytical process. Observations made during daily routines, current shifts, surface disturbances, even bird activity, were recorded, mapped, and evaluated. Over time, the accumulation of these minor insights formed a mosaic of operational understanding that enhanced decision-making and reduced exposure to risk. The human dimension remained central to escalation. Life aboard the submarine continued under confined, high-pressure conditions. Crews rotated through watches, maintained equipment, and performed routine drills. Within these routines, subtle innovations were embedded. Meal preparation, waste disposal, and the maintenance of environmental systems were all performed with an awareness of their potential operational impact. Fisher's practice of strategically disposing scraps became a case study in the integration of mundane tasks with tactical observation, a reminder that in warfare, ingenuity often emerges from the smallest actions. Allied detection technology continued to adapt as well. Sonar operators refined acoustic interpretation, incorporating feedback from minor anomalies into broader detection models. Aircraft reconnaissance leveraged visual cues, noting surface disturbances and patterns of movement associated with submarine activity. The iterative interaction between submarine crews and Allied observers created a continuous cycle of adaptation, each side learning, adjusting, and seeking advantage. This escalation, measured not in singular victories but in cumulative adjustments, underscores the fundamental nature of operational evolution in the underwater theater. The chapter also reflects on the psychological dimension of sustained operations. Crew members were acutely aware that every mission carried potential consequences, and that the results of subtle actions, scraps, minor course deviations, timing adjustments, might remain invisible in the moment. Discipline, focus, and patience were essential, as success was realized only through repeated application of knowledge and skill. The stress of confinement, coupled with the constant presence of danger, reinforced the importance of routine, observation, and reflection. In this context, Escalation was as much a mental exercise as a tactical one, emphasizing the human capacity to perceive, anticipate, and influence. Strategically, the escalation of submarine tactics and Allied detection efforts set the stage for complex interactions that would define subsequent operations. Patterns of avoidance, observation, and misdirection became increasingly sophisticated. The cumulative effect of these practices not only enhanced survival and operational efficacy for the submarine crews, but also shaped the methods and expectations of enemy forces. Each patrol added layers of insight, gradually transforming the theater of conflict into a domain where knowledge, observation, and subtle manipulation of environmental and human variables were as decisive as firepower. Chapter 2 closes on the understanding that escalation in underwater warfare is neither abrupt nor theatrical. It is an accumulation of small, disciplined actions informed by observation, human judgment, and adaptive learning. From the careful disposal of scraps to the meticulous management of vessel movement, each action contributes to a growing operational intelligence. The narrative demonstrates that in the deep, pressured world beneath the waves, escalation is inevitable, measured, and reflective, a continuous process in which human ingenuity, environmental awareness, and tactical discipline converge to shape outcomes in ways both subtle and enduring. By the third phase of the patrols, the interplay between submarine crews and Allied detection forces had become increasingly complex. What had begun as a series of cautious maneuvers and subtle improvisations had evolved into a systematic approach, the deliberate integration of human observation, environmental awareness, and tactical experimentation. Each mission was informed by lessons learned from previous encounters, with a focus on minimizing risk while maximizing operational effect. In this environment, ingenuity was not flamboyant or sudden. It was deliberate, methodical, and deeply human. Fisher, the submarine cook, continued to play an unexpected role in this evolution. His daily routines, preparing meals, managing provisions, and disposing of scraps, remained seemingly mundane. Yet, the crew began to recognize that even these ordinary actions could be leveraged to mislead enemy tracking. By varying the timing and location of waste disposal, adjusting the vessel's surfacing schedules, and observing environmental responses, Fisher contributed to a nuanced system of tactical countermeasures. The cumulative effect of these small innovations reinforced the broader principle that ingenuity often arises from disciplined attention to detail, rather than sudden brilliance. Submarine officers expanded upon these lessons by implementing coordinated tactics that balanced risk and opportunity. Convoys were shadowed with greater precision, patrol routes adjusted based on predictive assessment, and silent running procedures refined to reduce detectability. Crew members practiced depth adjustments and engine modulation with careful consideration of sonar sensitivity and surface activity. Each maneuver was executed with an understanding of both environmental conditions and anticipated enemy response. In essence, the submarine itself became a vessel of experimentation, where each patrol contributed incremental knowledge to operational practice. Allied forces, meanwhile, responded with increasing sophistication. Destroyers, aircraft, and patrol vessels developed adaptive patterns, analyzing anomalies and adjusting tactics accordingly. The presence of minor disturbances on the surface, once considered inconsequential, now triggered focused investigation. Submarine crews observed these responses and integrated them into their own planning. The interaction was iterative, each side learning, adapting, and attempting to anticipate the other's moves. Tactical ingenuity, therefore, was not isolated. It existed within a dynamic environment of mutual observation and adjustment. One key aspect of this phase was the use of environmental intelligence. Currents, tides, and water temperature gradients were studied meticulously, allowing crews to exploit natural conditions to their advantage. Sonar shadows and acoustic anomalies were predicted and utilized to mask movement. Even the behavior of marine life became a subtle indicator, providing clues about surface activity or water disturbances. Fisher's observations recorded and discussed among officers, contributed to this nuanced understanding. The interplay of human perception and environmental cues exemplifies the depth of tactical ingenuity required for successful submarine operations. Training and rehearsal were critical. Crew members engaged in repeated drills, simulating potential detection scenarios, emergency dives, and evasive maneuvers. These exercises were informed not only by technical manuals, but by accumulated experience and subtle patterns observed over multiple patrols. The integration of practical knowledge with structured practice ensured that responses became instinctive, reducing reaction time and enhancing operational efficacy. Tactical ingenuity in this context was inseparable from disciplined preparation and human adaptation. Communication within the submarine also reflected these lessons. Signals, both visual and auditory, were refined to minimize interception risk while ensuring coordinated action. Officers shared insights drawn from daily routines and environmental observation, transforming individual experience into collective knowledge. This exchange reinforced the human dimension of countermeasures. Ingenuity is not simply a product of isolated action, but of sustained collaboration, reflection, and disciplined practice. The cumulative effect of these strategies became apparent in subtle operational outcomes. Patrol logs indicated instances of evasion, misdirection, and minor disruption of enemy tracking. Allied forces, though technologically advanced, faced challenges in predicting behavior that was informed by nuanced human observation and environmental exploitation. The results were rarely dramatic in isolation. Rather, they accumulated over time, reflecting the quiet effectiveness of disciplined ingenuity. Fisher's contributions, though indirect, exemplify this principle. Seemingly trivial actions, when integrated into a broader tactical framework, can produce meaningful operational influence. Psychologically, this phase reinforced the resilience of submarine crews. Daily life remained confined and demanding, with long hours under pressure and constant awareness of external threats. Yet the exercise of observation, the application of knowledge, and the integration of minor innovations into routine practices provided a sense of agency. Crew members recognized that their attentiveness and ingenuity could shape outcomes, even in an environment where risk was ever-present and control partial. Tactical ingenuity, therefore, was as much a mental and emotional practice as a technical one. As the patrols progressed, patterns of operational adaptation became increasingly sophisticated. Minor actions, repeated and refined, created a layered system of countermeasures that challenged the predictability of Allied tracking. Each patrol contributed to cumulative insight, reinforcing the notion that effective tactics emerge from iterative learning, disciplined execution, and careful observation. The convergence of human skill, environmental understanding, and tactical creativity transformed ordinary routines into strategic tools, illustrating the subtle art of operational ingenuity beneath the waves. Chapter 3 concludes with the recognition that tactical ingenuity is inherently cumulative and reflective. The story of Fisher and his crew illustrates that success in submarine warfare is rarely the result of singular dramatic events. Instead, it emerges from the continuous interplay of observation, adaptation, and disciplined execution. From the careful disposal of scraps to methodical maneuvers and environmental exploitation, the actions of human agents create a web of influence that extends beyond immediate perception, shaping operational outcomes in profound and enduring ways. The foundation is laid for the next stage, the turning points that define the broader operational impact of these evolving strategies. As the months of patrols extended, subtle but decisive changes began to define the operational landscape beneath the North Atlantic. What had been a series of incremental adaptations and minor innovations evolved into identifiable turning points, moments where accumulated observation and discipline produced tangible shifts in effectiveness. The submarine, once solely a vessel of stealth and endurance, had become a platform for strategic experimentation. Fisher's daily routines, the meticulous preparation of meals, the methodical disposal of scraps, continued to serve as minor instruments of influence, now amplified within a larger, more structured operational framework. The first signs of these turning points emerged in the patterns of enemy behavior. Allied detection efforts, though increasingly sophisticated, remained subject to the unpredictability of cumulative minor actions. Surface vessels altered pursuit tactics based on environmental anomalies. Sonar operators recalibrated expectations in response to subtle disturbances, and aircraft reconnaissance interpreted minor visual cues as indicators of submarine activity. Each reaction was informed by prior encounters, yet no single observation or pattern could fully anticipate the disciplined ingenuity of the submarine crew. In this way, the turning points were less about sudden confrontation than the gradual reconfiguration of operational dynamics. Fisher and his fellow crew members recognized that their cumulative contributions, routine, disciplined, and observed over successive missions, had begun to produce measurable influence. Scraps cast overboard, timed with environmental awareness, created minor disturbances that, while individually inconsequential, collectively affected enemy tracking patterns. The crew began to formalize these observations, recording currents, timing, and outcomes to integrate into tactical planning. In effect, what had started as improvisation evolved into codified practice, reinforcing the principle that operational turning points are often the product of persistent, reflective effort rather than dramatic events. The human element remained central to these shifts. Crew members relied on observation, memory, and communication to identify patterns that could be leveraged for tactical advantage. Subtle adjustments in surfacing schedules, navigation, and engine modulation were informed by repeated study of environmental and enemy responses. The interplay of human perception and mechanical execution created a dynamic system in which every action, however minor, was evaluated for potential operational impact. Turning points, in this sense, were the product of disciplined human attention over time. One critical development involved the refinement of evasive maneuvers in response to Allied detection strategies. Depth adjustments became more precise, silent running procedures more nuanced, and the timing of surfacing carefully synchronized with environmental conditions. These shifts were not the result of improvisation alone. They were informed by accumulated data, reflection, and deliberate practice. Each maneuver contributed to an emerging pattern of predictability disruption. Allied forces found themselves responding to subtle variations rather than routine behavior, complicating detection and engagement. Simultaneously, the psychological landscape of the submarine crew evolved. Awareness of the strategic value of minor actions reinforced morale and focus. Crew members understood that their attention to detail, from the handling of provisions to the interpretation of sonar anomalies, directly influenced operational outcomes. The experience of being agents within a complex, responsive environment heightened both responsibility and vigilance. Turning points were thus not merely tactical, but also cognitive, reflecting the alignment of human insight with disciplined execution. Operational documentation during this period illustrates the layered impact of these shifts. Patrol logs detail minor successes, slight deviations in depth charge deployment by pursuers, delayed detection of course changes, and temporary misinterpretation of vessel movement. Individually, these events appear modest. Collectively, they indicate the emergence of a turning point where cumulative innovation and disciplined observation intersect to produce tangible strategic influence. Fisher's contributions, integrated into these operations, exemplify the unexpected ways in which human ingenuity permeates broader military outcomes. The environmental dimension continued to play a critical role. Currents, tides, and water temperature gradients, once considered background variables, were now actively incorporated into operational planning. The crew leveraged these conditions to minimize detectability and maximize the efficacy of maneuvers. Scraps disposed with environmental awareness produced both tactical and observational effects, subtly influencing the patterns interpreted by Allied forces. This intersection of human innovation and natural conditions exemplifies the layered nature of turning points. Progress achieved not through dramatic confrontation, but through persistent, thoughtful engagement with the operational environment. Allied forces, in response, adjusted their protocols incrementally. Sonar operators refined interpretations, reconnaissance flights adapted search patterns, and destroyers experimented with coordinated maneuvers. The cycle of observation, adaptation, and response intensified, creating a feedback loop that defined the operational theater. Submarine crews, guided by accumulated experience, navigated these adjustments with increasing sophistication. Turning points, therefore, were not isolated events but emergent properties of continuous interaction between human action, environmental awareness, and enemy adaptation. By the end of this phase, operational shifts had coalesced into recognizable patterns of success. The submarine crews' sustained attention to detail, disciplined experimentation, and integration of minor innovations into structured tactics produced outcomes that were both predictable and unpredictable. Allied tracking and response, while formidable, faced new challenges. The subtle manipulation of environmental and operational variables complicated engagement and increased survivability. The convergence of reflection, disciplined practice, and iterative adaptation illustrates the nature of turning points in extended campaigns. They are cumulative, deliberate, and human-centered. Chapter 4 closes with the understanding that turning points in warfare often emerge gradually, through observation, discipline, and continuous refinement of practice. Fisher's seemingly modest contributions, careful disposal of scraps, attentive observation of environmental and enemy patterns, and disciplined execution of routine tasks, had become part of a broader system of operational influence. These shifts in procedure and understanding laid the groundwork for resolution. The final assessment of effectiveness, the culmination of lessons learned, and the reflective comprehension of human ingenuity in shaping the course of conflict beneath the waves. As the final patrols of this campaign drew to a close, the quiet culmination of months beneath the Atlantic waves revealed the full measure of human ingenuity, adaptation, and perseverance. What had begun as simple, disciplined routines, meal preparation, waste disposal, attentive observation, had evolved into a sophisticated, human-centered system of tactical awareness. The crew's experience illustrated a fundamental principle of underwater warfare. The effectiveness of a submarine depended as much on the disciplined application of knowledge and environmental awareness as it did on weapons, machinery, or sheer audacity. Fisher, the cook whose attention to detail had become unexpectedly consequential, moved through the submarine with a sense of purpose grounded in familiarity. Each action, from arranging supplies to disposing of scraps, was now fully integrated into the broader operational methodology. His contributions, while subtle, had influenced enemy behavior and shaped the environment in which the vessel operated. The cumulative effect of his meticulousness, combined with the disciplined execution of the crew, underscored the principle that even the smallest gestures, when executed thoughtfully, could resonate far beyond their immediate context. The patrols revealed that operational effectiveness was inseparable from continuous observation. Minor disturbances in the water, subtle shifts in sonar readings, and the patterns of wildlife above the surface had become critical sources of information. Crew members, trained to integrate these observations with technical procedures, developed a heightened awareness of their environment and the enemy's likely responses. Through repetition, reflection, and disciplined action, they transformed ordinary experiences into tactical intelligence. The turning points identified in prior chapters were thus not anomalies, but the predictable outcomes of sustained human attention and adaptive learning. In parallel, the psychological dimension of life aboard the submarine reached its own form of resolution. Months of confinement, constant vigilance, and incremental adaptation had forged a resilient crew, capable of interpreting environmental and operational signals with precision. Confidence emerged not from the absence of danger, but from mastery of routine, the integration of insight into action, and the recognition that even minor contributions could influence outcomes. Fisher's role exemplified this dynamic. The cumulative significance of everyday acts underscored the human capacity to shape the trajectory of events, even within a complex and high-risk environment. From a tactical perspective, the campaign demonstrated the value of iterative innovation. Procedures that had once been improvised, scrap disposal, timing of surfacing, depth adjustments, were refined into standardized practices informed by observation, experimentation, and careful record-keeping. The crew's cumulative experience enabled anticipatory actions, mitigating risk and increasing operational efficacy. Each patrol added layers of understanding that, over time, produced discernible results: the disruption of enemy tracking, the evasion of detection, and the subtle exploitation of environmental factors. This systematic refinement illustrates that in warfare, resolution is rarely a single event. It is the product of disciplined, persistent effort. The narrative of these patrols also reflects broader lessons about the interplay between human ingenuity and technology. Sonar equipment, engine mechanisms, and weapon systems were essential, yet their effectiveness depended on the humans operating them. Observation, interpretation, and the disciplined application of insight transformed mechanical potential into tangible outcomes. Fisher's unassuming actions within the galley, when contextualized within this broader system, reveal how small, consistent efforts can reverberate across operational scales. Human attention, exercised with patience and precision, remain the most adaptable and influential component of submarine warfare. Cumulatively, the patrols underscore the inevitability of adaptation. Each crew member's contribution, no matter how modest, fed into a continuous cycle of learning, adjustment, and application. Minor disruptions to enemy behavior, previously unnoticed, became predictable. Small tactical innovations accumulated into measurable influence. The resolution of these operations was therefore both practical and conceptual. The successful navigation of the submarine through hostile waters, and the demonstration of how disciplined human observation can shape outcomes in environments defined by uncertainty and risk. In reflection, the story of Fisher and the submarine crew highlights the intersection of duty, ingenuity, and environmental awareness. It emphasizes that operational success in war is often rooted in attention to detail, patience, and reflective adaptation. The lessons learned beneath the waves, about observation, strategy, and the subtle influence of small actions, extend beyond this specific campaign, offering insight into the broader nature of human agency in complex, high-stakes environments. As the patrols concluded, the Atlantic returned to its indifferent rhythm, waves rolling over the hull in the early morning light. The crew emerged from months of confined, intense labor with a deepened understanding of both their environment and themselves. Fisher's seemingly mundane contributions, integrated with collective discipline and tactical awareness, had shaped outcomes in ways imperceptible to many but profound in effect. The resolution was not defined by dramatic confrontations, but by the steady accumulation of insight, reflection, and deliberate action, a testament to the quiet efficacy of human ingenuity in the theater of war. The chapter, and the campaign, closes on the recognition that every moment, every action, and every observation carried potential significance. The story of one submarine cook, his disciplined attention to scraps, and the broader operational context in which he worked illustrates a timeless principle. In warfare, as in life, persistent observation, thoughtful adaptation, and cumulative effort create influence far beyond immediate perception. The human capacity to integrate knowledge, skill, and patience underpins every turning point and ultimately defines the resolution of complex endeavors, whether beneath the waves or across broader theaters of conflict.